with the WTF Happen 2 series, is it the kind of idea of taking a story that not a lot of people know about, but there is so much quality, so much depth there, to bring that to an audience and to show the kind of underrepresented stories, or the stories of the losers or the outcasts, that sort of thing? Is it looking to those kind of marginalized and extreme cases that I think serves the popularity of those videos, or is it just the weird stories and bad drivers and people crashing?
I mean, I think the WTF series sort of, the video serves as a sort of like, it elicits that reaction. You have a look at a lot of those drivers on that list, you know, who have been in the WTF series. A lot of them would sort of elicit the reactions of, oh, they were crap drivers, some of the worst drivers in Formula One. And some others were either successful or sort of just disappeared or whatever. It's meant to elicit that reaction. You're meant to think back on the F1 career and just think, what the hell? Like, what happened to these characters? So you take Ricardo Rosset, for example, and that dude wins a lot of stuff over in Brazil. He comes over to Europe and he gets vice champion in his first year. And what is the equivalent of Formula 2 nowadays? Which for your first year, you know, is quite remarkable. Then he gets to Formula 1, does 2 and a bit years, and is regarded as one of the worst Formula 1 drivers of all time. It's like, what? How the heck did that happen? You know? And especially with Dan Ticktum, he's got such a bad reputation in the motorsport sort of circles. But, of course, there's only so much that is sort of publicly known about these characters, you know? There's a lot of stuff that's sort of taken out of context. Not all not all saying that what happened in his Formula 4 days was acceptable, but it's because of what happened back then that people just would not give him a second chance. These WTFs, they're few and far between, but they're meant to sort of elicit the reaction of, like, they'll make you say out loud, really, what happened to these guys? And so it'll take, you know, something that should have been something and ended up just completely collapsing in and of itself. So, yeah, another good one would probably be A1 Grand Prix, which, you know, great concepts, you know, the World Cup of Motorsport. It was something I personally loved. I loved the concept of it. But of course, what was it, 4 or 5 years later, it was involved in this massive corruption sort of a debacle. There were just cancellations after cancellations. People dropped out. It was just a mess. That's sort of where it's all born from. Yeah, I mean, they're in that series for a reason, for sure. They're some of the more unique stories.
And you spoke earlier about, you know, the fact that you were very directly involved with race driving, hands-on in New Zealand, not just kind of looking to Formula One with a fan opinion, but the knowledge of someone who's been very personally integrated into the motorsport industry and the reality of it. You mentioned that the reality often stands in stark contrast to people's expectations and what is put out by the marketing of the series. What was it that taught you that lesson? And in what kind of context did it come?
I guess sort of just understanding the sports politics and just how much money plays a role. And I think I've reiterated the story of Lance Stroll enough. I'm not talking about sort of his driving, but rather just the money that, you know, they were putting in. You know, you hear a lot of stories. It's all paddock chatter. So it's, you know, it's not something you can verify because it would never be verifiable because, you know, it would probably damage the image of the drivers.
Sure.
And just to reiterate, this is not the only driver that does this. I mean, like, a lot of the rich drivers go through the same thing. But, you know, you would just hear just how much money was being poured into some of these kids' careers, about how there were team orders, about how drivers were being brought in to coach drivers. And they knew that these drivers were good, but they just didn't have any money to race. And they said, okay, we'll give you £500,000 and we'll pay for your season, but You got to coach. You got to coach him, and you've got to stay behind him for the championship. You just
Wow.
Also in certain series over here about how you look at a driver who won the series and you're like, oh damn, he's amazing, and then you find out later that his engine had about 60 more horsepower than his competitors.